And let me thank Ranking Member Lindsey Graham and the other members of the committee for being with us in person or on video. I would also like to thank the many witnesses who will be testifying today, most of whom who will be joining us remotely because of this pandemic. I want to call this hearing to order in order to discuss a very simple, yet I believe profound question. And that question is this: why should the taxpayers of our country, many of whom are struggling economically as a result of the pandemic, be subsidizing the starvation wages being paid at some of the largest and most profitable corporations in America? That's the simple question. Why should working people be subsidizing some of the wealthiest families and largest corporations in America because of the starvation wages they pay their workers? And let me be very clear. The largest welfare recipient in America happens to be the wealthiest family in America, the Walton family, a family that owns the largest corporation in America, Walmart. This is a family that is worth over $200 billion. It is a family that has become $50 billion wealthier since March of 2020, during the worst public health crisis in over 100 years. This corporation that they own, Walmart, made over $15 billion in profit last year alone. And yet, despite this massive family wealth, despite these very high corporate profits, Walmart pays wages so low that tens of thousands of their employees are forced to rely on public assistance in order to survive. They are forced to rely on food stamps to feed their children, paid for by the U.S. taxpayer. They are forced to go into public housing to put a roof over their heads, paid for by U.S. taxpayers, and they are forced to go on Medicaid to get the health care they need, all of which is paid by U.S. taxpayers. While Costco, Amazon, Target, Best Buy, and other major corporations have all raised their minimum wage in recent years to at least $15 an hour, and in a few minutes we're going to hear from the CEO of Costco, the minimum wage at Walmart has remained stuck at $11 an hour for the last 3 years. The result? 760,000 workers at Walmart. Walmart is the largest employer in America. 760,000 employees, about half of their U.S. workforce, are paid less than $15 an hour. Now, I don't know. Maybe if you are a billionaire family, you may not understand this. But the simple truth is that no one in America can live with dignity, can raise a family on $11 or $12 an hour. And I must say, on a personal level, that I have talked to too many employees in this country who, with tears in their eyes, tell me about the struggles that they are having trying to feed their kids, pay their rent on the starvation wages that they receive. Today, we're going to ask how Walmart can afford to pay its CEO, who declined my invitation to be with us today, over $22 million in compensation last year. $22 million in compensation, but somehow they cannot afford to pay their workers a living wage. We're going to ask how Walmart can afford to spend $8.3 billion on stock buybacks in 2017, but cannot afford to pay its workers at least $15 an hour. And if Walmart thinks that they're going to avoid answering that question because they didn't show up today, they are deeply mistaken. The American people are sick and tired of subsidizing the wealthiest family in America. But let us be clear. Walmart is not alone. Last year, Dollar General made over $10 billion in profits, had enough money to pay its CEO $12 million in compensation, while the average Dollar General cashier is forced to survive on just $8.38 an hour. In 2019, McDonald's made over $6 billion in profits and paid its CEO over $18 million in compensation, while the average worker at McDonald's makes as little as $9 an hour. Unfortunately, the CEO of McDonald's also declined to testify before us today. Further, a November 2020 Government Accountability Office report that I requested found that taxpayers are not only subsidizing the poverty wages at Walmart, McDonald's, and Dollar General, but Dollar Tree, Wendy's, Burger King, Uber, Subway, Dunkin' Donuts, Home Depot, Lowe's, CVS, and Walgreens. We will hear from the author of that GAO report later this morning. In America today, and one of the great scandals of our economy, is that nearly half of all workers make less than $15 an hour, and they are forced to rely on public assistance programs costing taxpayers $107 billion each year. And today we're going to be discussing about what it means to work for a large corporation that makes billions of dollars in profit, but yet as a worker, you're not sure when you wake up in the morning if you're going to have enough food to feed your kids. During this hearing, we're going to hear from employees who work for McDonald's and Walmart. We're going to hear about half of American workers living paycheck to paycheck. We're going to hear about the fact that the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour has not been raised by Congress since 2007. Got that? Minimum wage not been raised by Congress since 2007, 14 years ago. And let us be clear, no ifs, buts, and maybes. $7.25 an hour is a starvation wage. That's what it is. We must raise the minimum wage to a living wage, at least $15 an hour. And when we do that, not only will we be lifting millions of Americans out of poverty, we will be providing a raise to 32 million American workers. And not only is raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour the right thing to do, it is also what the overwhelming majority of Americans want us to do. Poll after poll, over 60% of the American people have told us that they support increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Since 1998, every time a state has had an initiative on the ballot to raise the minimum wage, it has won, no matter whether that state was red, blue, or purple. Today, 8 states and over 40 cities have adopted laws to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. This is not a radical idea. Now, I do understand that concern has been raised about the Raise the Wage Act, which I have sponsored, which gradually raises the minimum wage to $9.50 this year, $11 in 2022, $12.50 in 2023, $14 in 2024, and $15 an hour in 2025. That's a gradual increase. Some people believe that these increases will harm small businesses. I understand that. Now, I fully understand that there is a major difference between Walmart and a small, struggling business. Many small businesses, all of us understand, are struggling today in Vermont, South Carolina, all across this country, and they need our help. To date, Congress has already provided $800 billion in financial assistance to small businesses, and an additional $50 billion is included in the reconciliation bill working its way through the Senate. I am also sympathetic to providing small businesses with the tax relief that they need to offset some of the increased labor costs associated with the minimum wage increase, just as Congress has done virtually every time that it has increased the minimum wage. But let me say this. Study after study has shown that a gradual increase in the minimum wage does not lead to increased unemployment. In fact, a review of 138 minimum wage increases at the federal, state, and local level since 1984, published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics, found no evidence that these laws reduce employment. Zero. My own state of Vermont, for example, a very rural state, largely dependent on small business, has the 3rd lowest unemployment rate in the country at 3.1%, while it also has one of the highest minimum wages in the country at $11.75 an hour. In my view, the best way to help small business is to put cash into the pockets of low-wage workers who will then spend that money in grocery stores, restaurants, and small businesses all across this country. But I hope, no matter what our views on the minimum wage may be, I hope that we will all agree on one thing. U.S. taxpayers should not be forced to subsidize some of the largest and most profitable corporations in America. It is time for the owners of Walmart, McDonald's, Dollar General, and other large corporations to get off welfare and pay their workers a living wage. And with that, I am delighted to introduce Senator Graham.
Well, thank you, Bernie, Mr. Chairman. Listen, this committee is going to be a fun place to be, I hope, because we're talking about things that matter. And, you know, the budget can be a very dry topic, but the budget is basically a process of where we take money from people, businesses, corporations, individuals, and we decide what to do with that money. Then we decide what tax rates to set for the country and what deductions to give. We're trying to set policy up here, taking other people's money to make sure the economy can grow and everybody in America can have a shot at the American dream. So the chairman rightly talked about small businesses and the effect his proposal may have on them. I want to spend a little bit more time in that. I worked, my family owned the Sanitary Cafe in Central South Carolina. My mom ran the restaurant / bar. My dad ran the liquor store on the other side of the panel, and downstairs was a 3-table pool room. When I got old enough, I ran that. We hired 1 or 2 people, depending on how business was. We were by no means rich, but owning your own business has a certain pleasure to it. And one thing I remember, Mr. Chairman, is that you can't get sick. If you actually own a small business and you don't open up, you don't get paid. I've seen my mom and dad go to work dog sick because if they didn't open up, they didn't get paid. And every time there was a cost of doing business, it had to be absorbed. And there's only so much you can pass on to the customer. Inflation is going to be an increasing problem in this country. So I want the American people to understand that there's a consequence to spending all this money. There's a consequence to flooding the zone with money. And when you start imposing cost into the economy, it will eventually be passed on to you because people are in business to make a profit. Now, Walmart. The theory of the case that the chairman espouses is that the CEO of Walmart could make $20 million, not $22, and they could absorb an increase in minimum wage and not give stock dividends, not pay their top people so much, and they just choose not to do that. Well, we can have our discussion about that concept, but here's where we should agree, that if you're running the Sanitary Cafe, you don't have that luxury because there's just only so much money coming in the door. And if you have to double the cost of paying a worker, you're probably not going to hire anybody else. And teenagers and senior citizens benefit from jobs in the hospitality industry and the service industry, make a little extra money that first job. But if you increase cost on the restaurants throughout this country right now, you're going to crush them, Mr. Chairman. In South Carolina, it's anticipated that 50% of the restaurants that have been hit by COVID will never come back. The state government and local government are mandating reduced seating because of COVID. They're mandating increased cost of doing business, and restaurants are struggling to stay alive. The PPP loans have been helpful, but they're not going to be around forever. And the bottom line, Mr. Chairman, is if we impose a new mandate on the expense side, combined with mandates to reduce revenue, we're going to crush these people. You have been championing this idea for a long time. I would just urge you that during the COVID crisis, the last thing the federal government should be doing is doubling the cost of doing businesses for small businesses in the hospitality service industry that are barely making it to begin with. And this has got nothing to do with COVID. It's in the COVID package. So I hope that you will understand that the 1.4 million jobs that CBO anticipates to be lost are going to come from people at the lower end. The Walmart guy's not going to lose his job. Who's going to lose his job? Some teenager or senior citizen who's able to get a little extra money and start building a resume. So my belief is there will be a time to look at increasing the minimum wage. That during the COVID crisis, this is the worst possible time to increase mandates on small businesses because they're barely making it to begin with. And I look forward to working with you about how could we, in a responsible way, increase the minimum wage but right now is not the time, in my view. And the construct you set up about corporate America versus everybody else, we'll have decades to talk about that, years to talk about that. I would just implore you to think of what we're doing at a time of restaurants and hotels barely hanging on because of the restrictions on travel. The golf industry in Myrtle Beach has been hit hard because people can't come and go like they used to. Is that now is not the time to do this, and I would just ask my Democratic colleagues to think long and hard about what you're doing. Because at a time when business is barely making it, if this ever became law, we would crush them. And people have worked too hard, too long, too many hours, too many worrisome conversations to keep their business alive for the federal government to come in and crush them. And that's what this would do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Our first panelist, our first guest is Craig Jelinek. Mr. Jelinek is the president and CEO of Costco. Costco is a company that made some $4 billion in profits last year while paying its employees a living wage of at least $15 an hour. Mr. Jelinek has been a director and president of Costco since February 2010 and CEO since January 1st, 2012. Mr. Jelinek started at Costco as a warehouse worker in 1984. He's worked in numerous jobs inside the company, and in 2012, he became the CEO, succeeding Costco's founder. Mr. Jelinek is, as I understand it, going to have to leave us at 11 a.m. We are very appreciative that he is with us today. Mr. Jelinek, thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Graham, and members of the committee. I'm Craig Jelinek, President and CEO of Costco Wholesale, and I appreciate the invitation to speak with the committee today. Costco is a membership-based retailer with headquarters in Washington State, 803 locations worldwide, including 558 in 45 U.S. states, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico. The basic principle of Costco's business is to provide our member customers with high-quality goods and services at the lowest possible prices. Our business model is based on very high sales volume, on limited selection of products, and an efficient, no-frills shopping environment. Costco is fortunate to be one of the top retailers in the U.S. and the world. We are a success to many different factors, but one of the most obvious is that we have the best employees in the retail industry. There are currently more than 180,000 Costco employees in the U.S., 275,000 worldwide. Since Costco's inception, the company has been committed to paying employees very competitive retail wages and providing them broad and affordable health care benefits. 2 years ago, we moved our starting hourly wage to $15 everywhere in the U.S. Effective next week, the starting wage will go to $16. Although there's a lot of external focus on starting wages and minimums, it's important to us that Costco employees have an opportunity to make more than just $15 or $16 an hour. Costco employees receive regular scheduled increases based on their hours worked. Employees working full-time hours will generally see 2 wage increases during the course of each year, and employees working part-time hours will see 1 increase until they reach the top of the scale, which increases every year. More than half of our hourly employees in the U.S. are paid at the top of our scales in excess of $25 an hour. And most of these employees also receive regular, twice yearly extra checks or bonuses up to $4,000 twice each year, which benefit our long-term employees. Our average wage for hourly employees in the U.S., excluding any overtime premium, but including the extra check component, is around $24. The average wage doesn't take into account the premium pay Costco employees received during the COVID-19 pandemic. Beginning in March of 2020, as we saw increased business sparked by the pandemic, we institute a $2 an hour premium for our employees in our locations. We've now extended this premium pay multiple times, and it continues today. As we approach the 1-year mark of this extra pay, we will end the temporary premium, but convert some of the premium to a permanent increase by raising each step on our hourly wage scales. At Costco, we're also proud to provide our full-time and part-time employees with broad and affordable benefits, including healthcare coverage for employees and dependents. About 89% of our employees are currently eligible for healthcare plans, and about 97% of these eligibles are enrolled, which speaks to the quality and the affordability of the benefits. And we guarantee employees will be scheduled enough hours to maintain their benefits. We also make sizable annual contributions to employees' 401k retirement accounts based on employees' years of service, irrespective of their own contributions. We also believe our paid sick time and vacation time policies for hourly employees are very competitive by retail standards. I want to note this isn't altruism. At Costco, we know that paying employees good wages and providing affordable benefits makes sense for our business and constitute significant competitive advantage for us. It helps us in the long run by minimizing turnover, maximizing employee productivity, commitment, and loyalty. We encourage our employees to view Costco as providing a career rather than just a job. And as a result, our employees' retention rates are very high by retail standards. In the US, our employees average over 9 years of service with the company. Over 60% of our US employees have 5 or more years with Costco, and over 1/3 have more than 10 years. We're very proud of the fact that more than 12,000 of our US employees have worked for the company for 25 years or more. Again, we feel the experience level and loyalty of our employees is a significant advantage for our company. As I conclude my remarks, I'd like to make it clear that the past 37 years of my long retail career have been working for Costco, and Costco is what I know. I'm not an economist, a regulator, or a legislator, and I don't pretend to know the methods or models that are right for any other large or small companies in any other industries. But I do know what is right for Costco. We're certainly not perfect, but we try to take care of our employees because they play such a significant role in our success. With that, thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Well, Mr. Jelinek, thank you so much for being with us today. Some might say, is how do you make money if you're paying workers high wages? And your point is not just the minimum wage, but throughout the company. If you're paying them strong benefits, you're spending a lot of money on your employees. Other companies are not. And yet you are arguing that you're not doing this simply out of generosity, out of morality. You're doing that because this is good business. So if you could tell us, what does it mean to the company and how your workers respond to the customers they interact with in terms of absenteeism, in terms of how long they stay with the company? What does treating workers with respect and dignity to your overall success of your company?
You know, for us, this is relatively, I think, simple. It takes a lot of time to interview, find employees, a lot of labor involved just trying to hire individuals. We want people to stay with us. They're people with long-term working skills, much easier to manage, much better, more loyalty to the company, and they feel like they're part of the company. We love loyalty, and we think less turnover makes you a much more productive company, less learning job skills, and they bring a lot of value based on their experience with the company. And we've always wanted longevity. We're not in to try to figure out how to lower the wage. We're always trying to figure out what we can do for the employee so they'll stay longer with our organization. And as I said before, we're certainly not perfect. We'll have our issues just like any other company.
As you indicated a moment ago in your testimony, not only will you be increasing your minimum wage from $15 to $16 an hour next week, but half of your hourly workers receive over $25 an hour. As I understand it, all of your employees receive paid vacation. Almost all of your workers receive high-quality health care benefits. What do these types of wages and benefits mean to employee morale at Costco?
Well, I think that speaks for itself for the simple reason that I think we're customer centric. We have low turnover. Our turnover in the retail industry is less than 10%. Anybody with the company over a year, our turnover is about 6%. So we don't turn a lot of employees, which we think is very beneficial. We lower our costs by paying wages and keeping employees.
So you think you have a business model which is not only the right thing to do, but works for you economically?
Yes, it does.
Good. Okay, Lindsay?
Mr. Chairman, how do you say your last name, sir?
Jelinek.
Mr. Jelinek, one, I want to congratulate you for your attitude that you have about your employees, and it's a great business you have. What was the gross revenues last year of Costco?
Last year, 163 billion.
Okay, what about the year before that?
Year before that was 148.
Okay, so it's been pretty consistent, right?
Correct.
Now, you said something I thought was very, very wise. You're not testifying about other areas of the economy, other sectors of the American economy. You're just telling the Costco story. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you have paid vacation?
Yes, we do have paid vacation.
I just want to give an aside. I can't remember going on a vacation until I was in high school. Because if you own a restaurant, it's hard to close. And if you're not there, people steal you blind. So I just want to let you know that my concern is not really about Costco, because I think anybody that makes $158 billion, you can probably, at 53, whatever the number is, you can absorb some increase in cost. I'm worried about the small business owner who is struggling because COVID has reduced their capability to earn a living. Do you understand where I'm coming from?
If you're asking me correct, I do understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. So if you run a restaurant or a hotel and nobody can travel in the country and seating capacity has been reduced by half or more, the revenues are down. And can you understand why an increased mandate from the government in terms of cost would be a devastating blow?
No, I can't understand why it would be a devastating blow. I think it's a devastating blow to the employees.
Okay, but you can't understand. Let's see if I got this right. You can't understand why a restaurant in South Carolina who has got half seating capacity because of COVID, barely hanging on, it would be devastating them to increase their cost in terms of doubling the minimum wage. You don't understand that?
I don't know that I was suggesting doubling the minimum wage. That's not the position.
Proposal is over 5 years, Lindsay.
Yeah. Well, in 5 years from now.
And my view is I'm not here to discuss a proposal.
Okay.
I'm here strictly to discuss Costco.
No, that's fair enough. Would you support $11 hour minimum wage increase being proposed by Senator Manchin?
$11?
Yeah.
It's better than $7.25.
Fair enough. Thank you very much.
That it, Lindsay? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Senator Whitehouse.
I'm good.
Senator Toomey. Oh, I'm sorry. Who?
Warner, you go next.
All right. Senator Warner. Mark, you there? Okay. Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll actually reserve my questions for the following panels, but appreciate the CEO from Costco articulating just how valuable it is, sometimes hard to monetize, but how valuable it is to have well-compensated employees in terms of satisfaction of those employees, performance, and commitment to a thriving business and company.
Okay. Senator Toomey, if Pat is with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, a little bit louder if you could. You're low.
Can you hear me okay now?
Not much better. No.
What country are you in?
Yeah, I'm in the strange country called Washington, D.C. I'll try to speak more loudly, and hopefully this will be audible. Mr. Jelinek.
Yeah, we're good. We're good now, Pat.
Okay, great. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for your testimony. I think it would be helpful to understand a little bit about your business model and how it compares to some of the other big players in your space. Costco had a recent SEC filing in which you state, and I'll quote this, it's not too long, you say, because the hours of operation are shorter than other retailers, and due to other efficiencies inherent in a warehouse type operation, labor costs are lower relative to the volume of sales. Merchandise is generally stored on racks above the sales floor and displayed on pallets containing large quantities, reducing labor required. So from what little I know about your business and from what I just read in the SEC filings, would it be fair to infer that relative to most of your most direct large competitors, you have fewer workers per dollar of sales?
Absolutely.
Right. So you pay more, but you pay more to fewer people.
Well, of course,
Right.
because we have efficiencies built into the business.
Right. You have a business model that does that. And I think the important thing to note here is that that's exactly what you get if you decide to arbitrarily establish a wage that's higher than the prevailing market rate. Some people will actually get raises, and other people will lose their jobs. I'm reminded of the wisdom of Thomas Sowell, who said, government can set any minimum wage it wants. There's always a minimum wage of zero. And that's why the CBO estimates that if indeed our Democratic colleagues go ahead and double the minimum wage, 1.4 million or more Americans will just lose their jobs. Let me ask another question. Surely you would acknowledge that there's a very different cost of living in New York City and San Francisco than in Altoona, Pennsylvania, or Birmingham, Alabama, right?
Correct.
So doesn't it make sense for the states to decide what is an appropriate minimum wage to reflect the preponderance of the cost of living in their state? I mean, Alabama has a very, very different cost structure as a general matter than Massachusetts. Doesn't it make sense to allow the two states to decide which is best for their citizens?
That's the states to make that decision. We pay the same wage no matter what state we're in.
I understand that, but our Democratic colleagues are proposing to have a national uniform minimum wage that disregards what various states' preferences are.
I'm not here to debate that. I'm just here to tell you what Costco does.
So you're not here to advocate for a particular minimum wage.
I think a minimum wage is important. I'm only here to tell you what Costco does.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, and I'll yield the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Pat. Mark Warner, Senator Warner.
To my good friend Senator Toomey, I think states ought to have some flexibility, but I do think we need a federal minimum wage. It's not a top-end wage. And when $7.25, which is still the minimum wage in Virginia, because he's not adopted a change, that does not allow any reasonable family to put food on their table and a roof over their head. So I think the idea of a national minimum wage makes an enormous amount of sense. And then if states want to raise that above that, that ought to be their choice. But no one in America should be working full time and not be able to feed their family or put a roof over their head. Mr. Jelinek, thank you for appearing. I've spent a long time on this issue of how you actually make capitalism work for a greater group of people. I think capitalism, when it really works, has taken more people out of poverty than any other system. The chairman and I have had lots of discussions on this issue, and I respect his passion on these issues. But one of the things I think you're showing is that you can have an extraordinarily successful company, pay people that living wage at $15, the fact that 90% of your workers have health care, that you've got 401k plans, you've got vacation time, you've got ability for family leave. You have not decided to outsource a huge amount of your workforce the way many other retailers have. And I know the chairman already asked you about turnover, retention, and productivity. I guess what I would like to talk to you about is, can you also talk about what you've done at Costco, not only to retain workers, but to provide that upward level of mobility for someone that may be coming in, in a starting position, but could make a career? I know you've got a much longer timeline than most people in the retail sector, and I'd love you to talk a little bit about that upward mobility path you give to your workforce.
Well, 95% of our employees we promote within the organization. We usually, maybe attorneys council, although we have 3 homegrown attorneys that came through the system. Pharmacists, sometimes you have to go from the outside, although we've had techs that come in the pharmacy business and become pharmacists. But 95% of the individuals grow through our organization. So that's really what we do. We think they know that, they've been there, they have credibility, and they grow through the organization. We give them the opportunity to make higher wages as they go into management positions, buying positions, tech positions, and to just grow with the organization and continue to improve their economic situation.
Mr. Jelinek, one of the things I've been looking at for a long time, and I again commend how you treat your workforce, but my fear is we've got an unlevel playing field from a tax, accounting, and reporting system in terms of investment in human capital versus investment in tangible goods. I mean, if you were to buy a robot to automate some of your processes at Costco, back office automation, you spend $5,000 in that robot, you get an R&D tax credit. The robot's an asset you can put on your balance sheet. You take 2 of your workers and train them to be more efficient than the robot, you don't get the same tax treatment or the same accounting treatment. I've been looking at trying to create the equivalent of a R&D tax credit for employers that actually upskill their workforce. And I know I'm not I'm springing on this on you right now, but the idea of incentives for employers to upskill their workers, could you talk to me generally about that in my last 46 seconds?
When you say we're always looking to become more efficient for a lot of reasons, to make it safer for the employee, right? To reduce injuries, anything that we can do, you're always looking for efficiencies in the way you run your business. So just like any company, you do have to control your costs. One of the reasons that we do that is not because of wages. If we can make work more efficient, as we said before, we work off of lower margins. That's what we do. You can have more people, you just raise your prices, and just like other companies can do, they work off of higher margins. We pay higher wages, but always figure out how to become more efficient the way we run our business.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
Thank you, Mark. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jelinek, I want to go back to Lindsay's point about your business model in comparison to your competitor's business model. Again, you have an admirable business model providing good products at a very low price because you engage in high volume, low margin. But one of the reasons you're able to do that is you have a very low cost structure, correct? Do you have any idea, and again, you compete against people like Walmart, Sam's Club, but also you compete against little small mom and pop shop retailers as well. Do you have any idea of your cost advantage compared to a smaller retailer, maybe in a neighborhood? It's a little more convenient for consumers to get to versus going to yours on your locations of strip malls? I mean, what kind of, how much lower are your cost of sales versus a standard retailer that has a bunch of products just on the shelves?
Oh, it could probably be from anywhere to 0 to 20%, 25%. No question about that.
So you got lower costs, you probably have lower rent per square foot. Your bulk display is just a different way of shopping that, again, consumers
Absolutely.
make that choice.
Those are the efficiencies that we build in.
So again, you can afford $15 an hour, but some of your smaller competitors can't. Wouldn't it be true if you raise the minimum wage up too high, you start putting those smaller competitors out of business? That'd be an advantage to Costco, wouldn't it?
We don't want to put anybody out of business because some of those small businesses buy from us.
I understand, but that would be
logical.
But again, I think that's the concern a lot of us have is that, the 1.4 million people get lose their job, the businesses that can't afford whatever government dictates in terms of wage being put out of business. In the end, that's going to benefit people like Amazon and yourself that, again, have high volume, low margin, can afford to pay more than a smaller retailer.
If anybody, the pie is only so big. If people go out of business, you're absolutely right. Someone has to get that business.
So again,
if you can just let me finish. I'm only trying to talk to you what's right for Costco.
No, I understand. So I'm trying to make the point that what's right for Costco is not necessarily right for smaller retailers that also have a value to consumers.
Absolutely. I can't answer
about.
That's a decision that everybody else has to make. I don't make that decision.
But when the government comes in and mandates a cost structure, a wage, and puts a smaller competitor out of business, that's what concerns many of us. Let me ask you another question.
I can tell you my past experience that wages usually don't put people out of business. How you run your business will put you out of business.
Again, you've been working Costco. I've got experience in manufacturing. My experience in manufacturing, by the way, tells me that a $15 minimum wage is a moot point. Because most manufacturers, quite honestly, most employers that I talk to in Wisconsin, their biggest problem is they can't hire workers almost at any wage. Because one of the reasons is we're plussing up unemployment benefits, and at least half of people that are on unemployment are making more now than when they were actually on the job. But let me ask you that question. How many unfilled positions do you have at Costco right now?
Very few.
Because you're paying $15 an hour.
And above.
And again, that's what the marketplace actually does. But again, I have employers manufacturing in Wisconsin that can't hire people at $15 an hour. They can't hire people at $18 or $19 an hour. So that's also a huge problem. But again, Mr. Jelinek, I think Costco is a great store. It's the right place to shop for certain things. But again, I think those of us on this side of the aisle are certainly concerned about the smaller mom and pop shops that also provide products and services in a way that consumers value as well. We don't want to see them put out of business because of government mandated wage. But thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Jelinek, we're going to respect your request. I know you have to leave it. You're on the West Coast now, right? Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, so we appreciate you very much, your being with us, and you told us you had to leave at 11, and it's 11. We're going to discharge you, and thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Our next panelist is Terence Weiss. This is panel number 2. And our first panelist on this panel is Terence Weiss, who is a McDonald's worker, a Fight for 15 advocate, and a union leader from Kansas City, Missouri. Mr. Weiss is a 41-year-old father of 3 who works for McDonald's, making less than $15 per hour. Despite his fiancée also working full-time as a home care aide, their low wages mean the family struggles to make ends meet. They were evicted a year ago and face eviction again during this pandemic. Mr. Weiss, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Graham, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Terence Weiss, and I'm a 41-year-old second-generation fast food worker from Kansas City, Missouri. I'm honored to speak with you on the issue of taxpayers subsidizing poverty wages of large profitable corporations like the one I work for, McDonald's. I began fighting for 15 and a union in 2013. I felt the struggle of raising a family on low wages my whole life. It began in South Carolina, where I grew up in government housing with my brothers and sister. My mom worked full-time at Hardee's for 30 years, and my dad was a cook in the military. My mom would be up at 4 a.m. getting ready for work, and it was my job soon after to get my siblings up and ready to go to school. It was also my job to sign for the food stamps. We signed back then from the postman. Even with 2 full-time incomes, my family had to skip meals. One winter, I didn't even have a coat until the guidance counselor gave me one from the Lost and Found. Hardworking people with 2 full-time incomes should not have to live like this in the richest nation on earth. I was a great student, and in the 8th grade, I was in advanced placement classes. My teachers were saying things like, "Terence, you're gonna do great stuff. You can be whatever you wanna be." I was gonna be a Gamecock. I was gonna go to the University of South Carolina and be a writer. But I went to work at age 16 to try to help my family survive. One day I came home from school, it was no food in the fridge and the lights were turned off. So I went and got my first job at Taco Bell, making $4.25 an hour. I remember my first check was $150, and I gave it to my mom to help pay the light bill. But one job wasn't enough. Second, I got a second job at Wendy's to bring more money in to help my family. I tried to balance both work and school. I had A's in history, English, science, and math, but I started falling asleep in class. My teachers then began asking me, "Terence, what's wrong?" I didn't need AP calculus to run the numbers at home. There simply wasn't enough money for basic necessities. I had to leave school and my dream of college behind at 17, and I became a full-time worker. I've been working in fast food ever since. Now I have a family of my own. My fiance is a home healthcare provider, and we have 3 daughters, ages 18, 17, and 15. She takes care of some of the most vulnerable people in our society, but neither of us make enough to make ends meet. My family has been homeless despite 2 incomes. We've endured freezing temperatures in our purple minivan. I'd see my daughter's eyes wide open, tossing and turning in the back seat. Try waking up in the morning, getting ready for work and school in your minivan with your family of 5. That's something a parent can never forget and a memory you can't take away from your children. You should never have to work multiple jobs in the United States and have nowhere to sleep. And that was before the pandemic. Since COVID-19, it's gotten harder. In March, my hours were cut from 40 to 28, and some of my coworkers were taken off the schedule entirely. My family and I had been evicted and had to move in with relatives. We had 11 people in a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house. During the lockdown, McDonald's gave me a piece of paper to show the police in case I got pulled over. It said I was an essential employee. But I can tell you they treat us more like second-class citizens than essential workers. I work for McDonald's, the 2nd largest corporation in America, and still rely on food stamps and Medicaid. I don't receive as much as I did in food stamps when I was making $8, $9 an hour, but I still need help. I want to stand on my own. I want to provide my girls with 3 meals a day and give them opportunities I didn't have. I don't want to go to the supermarket with my kids and pull out my benefit card to pay for food. My check should handle that. This is what generational poverty looks like in America. It's what our movement has been fighting to end. It's why I joined the Fight for 15 in a movement to ensure that my mother's past and my present is not my daughter's future. We need Congress to act immediately to raise the federal minimum wage to 15. Everyone who wakes up and works in our country deserves access to the promise that America made to each and every one of us: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's a promise to this day that remains unfulfilled for too many of us. Thank you. and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Wise, thank you very, very much. Our next Senator, Chris Van Hollen, will introduce Cynthia Murray, who is a Walmart worker from Hyattsville, Maryland. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's an honor to introduce to the committee a great Marylander, Cynthia Murray, who's been an associate at the Walmart store in Laurel, Maryland since the year 2000. Ms. Murray works in the fitting department. She also handles all returns for 7 different departments. She's got a lot of experience and so is often called upon by her colleagues to troubleshoot and solve problems. Ms. Murray works 32 hours a week, and even after 20 years in her position, still makes less than $15 an hour. Fortunately, in Maryland, that's going to change, where our state minimum wage will gradually increase to reach $15 an hour in the year 2025. But that is not the case in so many other states, as we're hearing, where the minimum wage has remained stuck at $7.25 since 2009. Ms. Murray is a founding member of the nonprofit worker organization United for Respect, and she volunteers on the board of directors there. Raised in a union family, she has led efforts to change policies at Walmart to better the lives of essential workers, and her activism has contributed to winning family leave policies for pregnant and parenting Walmart workers and better wages, a fight that she continues here today. Members of the committee, Ms. Murray is also a Walmart stockholder, and she has been a vocal advocate against excessive stock buybacks at Walmart and has brought shareholder resolutions to the company to improve the lives of associates. She's a proud mother, grandmother, and I thank her for joining us here today as we conduct these very important hearings for the well-being of people throughout the country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member.
Ms. Murray?
Good morning,
Good morning.
Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Graham, members of the Senate Budget Committee. My name is Cynthia Murray. I live in Hyattsville, Maryland, and I have been a Walmart associate for 20 years. I have asthma, and my son has underlying health conditions. Like tens of millions of essential workers, I've been working full-time since the virus hit, putting my life and my son's on the line every day for less than $15 an hour. I'm here today as a leader with United for Respect to speak out on behalf of 1.4 million hourly associates who work for Walmart, the largest private employer in the United States. The U.S. Senate, the President, and the American people need to hear from people like me, because we are the experts on why raising the federal minimum wage simply cannot wait another day. Nobody working for the richest family in America should be going hungry. But senators, at my store, people in the break room at lunchtime have nothing to eat for lunch. Walmart paychecks simply don't cover rent, bills, and groceries. So working people sit there hungry, while the Walton family have made over $50 billion since the pandemic began. The Waltons pocketed $5.7 million every hour. But Walmart's CEO is saying that somehow a $15 minimum wage is too much compensation for frontline workers like me. I don't think so. In 2017, Walmart rewarded their shareholders with a $20 billion handout to buy back their own stock. Had they invested half of that amount in workers, 1 million Americans could have had a raise of more than $5 an hour. This month, Walmart did it again, approving a new $20 billion share repurchase program while keeping the starting wage at $11. Walmart is the largest private employer of American women and the largest corporate employer of Black and brown people in America. Wages at Walmart matter for America. Let me tell you about Kendra Wilson from Jonesboro, Georgia. She's a single mother of 2, and she's been at Walmart for 4 years and works as a personal shopper. She currently earns $11.94 an hour. Kendra must rely on public assistance, Medicaid, and SNAP, and on local food pantries to provide for her 2 young sons. Kendra says, Working for one of the largest corporations in the world, I should not have to choose between paying my bills and feeding my children. Another associate, Kelly Riswick, and her husband both work at Walmart in Duluth, Minnesota, supporting their 3 children. Kelly makes $12.38 and relies on WIC for formula for their baby, but says WIC doesn't provide her with enough formula. Kelly goes uninsured because she had to choose between the $85 a month premium and feeding the baby. She chose feeding her hungry baby. Mr. McMillan announced last week that the starting wage will remain at $11 an hour. That starting wage is a starvation wage. It's a wage that requires the federal government to foot the bill for feeding Walmart associates' families, and many of us are still going hungry. They say they'll do it gradually, and you don't have to force their hand. But let me tell you something. The only way Walmart is going to raise our wages is if you make it the law, and it is way past time to do so. Last month, there was a COVID outbreak in my store. We were scared, so we organized. I want to personally thank you, Senator Van Hollen, for standing with us. After your inquiry to Walmart, we have soap and hot water in the bathroom and break rooms so we can wash our hands during a deadly global pandemic. Working people deserve a basic respect. I work hard at my job and I am good at what I do. I'm 65 in 3 months and I have no retirement plans. My doctor says I need an MRI for my back, but I'm putting it off because I can't afford the copayment. People like me are putting off retirement, putting off health care, because people like you have put off raising the minimum wage for 12 years. I grew up in Pittsburgh, youngest of 4 children, raised by my dad and my grandmother. My dad was a Teamster. He had a good job and a strong union. As a single parent, he was able to support us. Senators, that is a story from a bygone era. That day in America is gone. Our reality today is that 40 million people are working in poverty, sometimes 2 and 3 jobs. We have to stop being a country of billionaires and working poor. You can end that. We can end that. It's time to raise our minimum wage. Thank you for hearing my testimony today.
Ms. Murray, thank you very much for being with us. We appreciate it. Next on this panel, we have Thea Lee, who is president of the Economic Policy Institute. EPI is a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank created in 1986 to include the needs of low and middle-income workers in economic policy discussions. Ms. Lee, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Graham, members of the committee, for inviting me to participate in today's important hearing. As you said, I am Thea Lee, president of the Economic Policy Institute, the nation's premier think tank for analyzing the effects of economic policy on America's working families. Today's hearing poses an important question. Why do large, profitable corporations pay such low wages that their employees are eligible for and must rely on federal anti-poverty programs just to make ends meet? And what policies are necessary to address this problem? I would like to make the case today that the wage-setting mechanism in the U.S. labor market is massively broken. 4 decades of flawed policy decisions have systematically eroded the bargaining power of workers, while simultaneously concentrating the political and economic power of large corporations and the wealthy. The result is a labor market where, contrary to neoliberal economic models, actual wage levels for most workers reflect generations of accumulated systemic racism, sexism, and occupational segregation, where the federal minimum wage is egregiously inadequate, leaving too many workers below a decent and adequate standard of living, where workers' ability to join a union and bargain collectively has been eroded, and where highly profitable corporations remunerate their executives lavishly, but choose to pay poverty wages to their frontline and production employees. This is not just unfair and inhumane for workers and their families. It is also inefficient in that it rewards a short-term business model characterized by high turnover and over-reliance on government safety net programs. It contributes to slower growth and growing inequality, especially along race and gender lines. And during the pandemic, we saw vividly that those workers most at risk of contracting the virus on the job were also disproportionately those earning at or near the minimum wage. According to the GAO report that we're discussing today, 12 million wage-earning adults are enrolled in Medicaid, and 9 million wage-earning adults are in households receiving food stamps. About 70% of those worked at least 50 weeks a year, and about 90% worked in the private sector. Full-time work should provide a path out of poverty, but the reality in the United States today is quite different. While federal anti-poverty programs provide an essential lifeline to people who need it, but these programs were never intended to relieve profitable corporations from their responsibility to pay a living wage and benefits. We need to strengthen and expand these programs, but we also need to ensure that our labor market and broader economic policies rebalance bargaining power between workers and employers so that unscrupulous and uncaring corporations do not benefit from federal safety net programs, which puts more responsible employers at a competitive disadvantage. Key elements to rebalancing bargaining power include, first, raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2025. Second, reform and modernize our labor law so that workers have a fair chance to exercise their rights to form unions and bargain collectively. And third, pass a robust and comprehensive relief and recovery bill, as President Biden has proposed. Going forward, we should prioritize achieving and maintaining a full employment economy. In principle, people cannot supply their labor if they cannot sustain themselves and their families. We heard amazing testimony this morning from Terence Weiss and Cynthia Murphy, how unconscionably inadequate the current federal minimum wage is. Today, according to EPI research, in every region of the United States, a single adult without children needs at least $31,200 to achieve a modest but adequate standard of living. That is what a full-time worker making $15 an hour earns annually. And by 2025, when the Raise the Wage Act will be fully implemented, this will hold true not just in every region of the United States, but in every single county, both urban and rural. Congress has a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to pass the Raise the Wage Act, which is included in President Biden's American Rescue Plan Act. Raising the federal minimum wage now is an essential element of a robust and equitable recovery package. And it is affordable, both for businesses and for the economy. We see that the minimum wage has lost almost a third of its value since 1968, and yet over those 50 years, the economy's capacity to deliver higher wages has more than doubled, as measured by labor productivity. And the weight of economic research is definitive and convincing. Minimum wage increases have worked exactly as intended by raising wages without substantial negative consequences on employment. High-quality academic scholarship that I cited in my testimony, examining dozens of case studies, confirms that modest increases in the minimum wage have not led to detectable job losses. And even some studies that predict job losses, as did a recent CBO study, also predict that a $15 minimum wage in 2025 would overwhelmingly benefit the low-wage workforce, raising wages for 27 million workers and reducing the number of people in poverty by nearly 1 million. When the GAO revealed that millions of full-time workers rely on food stamps and Medicaid, it underscored how deeply broken our labor market is today. Especially in the wake of the pandemic and associated economic cataclysm, it is urgent that Congress act to rebalance bargaining power in the labor market. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lee. Our next witness is Doug Holtz-Eakin, President of the American Action Forum. Dr. Holtz-Eakin is a former CBO director and was chief economist of the President's Council of Economic Advisors under President George W. Bush. Dr. Holtz-Eakin, thanks very much for being with us.
Well, thank you, Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Graham, and members of the committee for the privilege to be here today and testify on this important topic. I want to make 3 very simple points, and then I look forward to the opportunity of answering any questions you may have. Point number 1 is the data clearly display this overlap between the working population and the social safety net population in the United States. Whether that's a large or small overlap is in the eye of the beholder, there's no question it's there. Some interpret this overlap as a subsidy to employers by providing social safety net benefits to some of their employees, but I think the economics actually indicate the opposite. The availability of outside income and an alternative for those workers would force employers to pay more, not less, to attract people out into the labor force and into employment. And so in my written testimony, I've tried to gauge the overall magnitude of the increase in wages that have been necessitated by the U.S. social safety net, frankly, the research on this is sufficiently unclear that you can't get a definitive answer, but the direction's unambiguous. Wages are higher than they otherwise would be in the absence of those social safety net programs. The third point I want to make is that the proposal to raise the minimum wage to $15 by 2025 would not eliminate this overlap. There would still be, and there are in the data, people who are eligible for Medicaid receiving SNAP benefits when they make more than $15 an hour. It's also, I think, an unfortunate time to contemplate raising the minimum wage, especially an increase of that magnitude. As the Congressional Budget Office has said, this in general is going to cost something like 1.4 million jobs in the United States. And the reason for that job loss is that by writing a law that says the minimum wage is going to go from $7.25 to $15, you haven't created any additional income to pay those higher minimum wages. So that income will have to come from somewhere else. And that income is going to come by not hiring additional worker and cutting the total labor cost in that way, or it might come from a small business that does not reopen and thus essentially come from that business owner. And so the reality will be that we will take money from someone who doesn't get a job and give it to someone who has a job. That's a pretty perverse and unfair thing to do, especially at this time. We'll take it from someone who can't reopen their restaurant and give it to someone who has a job. Again, an incredibly perverse and unfair sort of redistribution. This isn't a hypothetical. About 60% of the minimum wage workers are in the leisure and hospitality sector. And in the spring of 2020, we lost 8.3 million jobs in leisure and hospitality. And while we have climbed back and put about 4.4 million of those people back to work, there are still millions of leisure and hospitality workers out of work, and increasing the minimum wage of this magnitude will guarantee that some of them will simply stay there. We lost about 50% of the small businesses in the leisure and hospitality sector last spring, and we have far from reopened those businesses, and so we will guarantee that they never open their doors again in the United States, and we'll have to find other places for people to get jobs. In general, the CBO says that the raising the minimum wage to $15 is a $500 billion mandate on employers in the United States. We're trying to climb out of the steepest, most rapid recession in the history of the United States, and raising taxes by $500 billion is on no one's list of ways to do that. This is a de facto stealth $500 billion tax increase that would impede the ability to recover, far from supporting it. So I would encourage you to contemplate raising the minimum wage by a smaller amount at another point in time when the economy can handle it, but to do so now would be a grievous policy error. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Holtz-Eakin. Now we have Mr. Carl Sobocinski. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. Mr. Sobocinski is the owner of Table 301 Restaurant Group and a board member of the South Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association. Table 301 Restaurant Group has several restaurants that employ hundreds of people. Mr. Sobocinski, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Graham, and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to testify today. My name is Carl Sobocinski, and I'm the founder and president of the Table 301 Restaurant Group. I've worked up tirelessly in this industry for over 30 years and built this company. Today, our company stands at 9 restaurants and over 300 associates, as you mentioned. We're down over 100 associates from where we were a year ago today. On May 1st, we'll open our 10th restaurant and add 50 more jobs. Table 301, like the restaurant and hospitality industry, is a job generator. And with over 15 million restaurant and food service workers in America, our industry employs nearly 1 in 10 U.S. workers. 63% of adult workers have worked in the restaurant industry at some point in their careers. And did you know that 48% of adult workers, nearly half of all Americans, got their first job in the restaurant industry? Our industry is impactful. We're making a difference in America's workforce. We have a story to tell, and we should have a seat at the table when discussing wage issues. My story doesn't differ from the thousands of restaurateurs and chefs around this country. I started in an entry-level position as a college student. I immediately fell in love with this industry. I worked my way up to management and a food and beverage director position. And then after my on-the-job training, I took a leap of faith, took on significant debt, and opened my first restaurant in 1993. 4 years later, I opened Sobeys New South Cuisine, which is the flagship restaurant of the Table 301 restaurant group. Along the way, we've had some incredible successes and a few hardships, like closing 2 restaurants and eliminating significant jobs during the recession of 2009, and again for unforeseen circumstances in 2013. Our greatest success is the selling of 3 of our concepts to 3 long-term, hardworking chefs and managers. We are establishing the next generation of restaurants and entrepreneurs. One beautiful story is that of Jorge Barrales. Jorge, affectionately known as Poppy, started with us in 1997 on opening night. He worked his way up into a management position, and in 2013, he and I together opened a little store, Poppy's Tacos. In 2019, Poppy and his family were able to purchase that restaurant and are now the sole proprietors and proud owners of Poppy's Tacos. Our industry has always been one to fight back in the face of adversity, and restaurant workers are some of the most resilient in any industry. Despite this pandemic and losing 1 in 6 restaurants around the country, our industry will fight every day, and I'm optimistic and enthusiastic about the future and about our recovery. I would like to thank you at this time for the quick work a year ago to provide the PPP funding, which we applied for and did receive. That is the sole reason that my restaurants are all still operating today. But this leads me to the reason I am here today. Mr. Chairman, it is unfathomable to me that Congress can consider the Raise the Wage Act in the middle of a pandemic. The exact people you're trying to help will very likely either end up with diminished wages if we eliminate the tip credit, lose their jobs to technology, or lose jobs in general as operators will eliminate several entry-level positions. Let me be clear, and I think I speak for most sensible business owners. I am not opposing a minimum wage increase, but I'm looking for a common sense approach to this. This is not a one-size-fits-all solution. $15 an hour in New York City, San Francisco, Washington, D.C. is not the same as $15 an hour in Greenville, South Carolina. I think most can agree that $7.25 as a wage is too low for even an entry-level position. Table 301 is a great example of the free enterprise system working, where our entry-level wage is at $10 an hour, not the current minimum wage. If the minimum wage goes up to $15 an hour, take our entry-level wage of $10 an hour. We're now increased 33%. That means that every worker would expect, rightly so, a 33% increase. So take every $100,000 in payroll that I currently have and add $33,000 to that, increased employer taxes, increased premiums on workman's comp policies, and increases in expenses for benefits such as 401k contributions. And you'll have businesses closing faster than they have during this pandemic. Today, I urge you to abandon this fast-tracked approach and instead have a real and honest conversation with small business owners across a broad spectrum to devise a responsible wage increase that will provide opportunities for workers without eliminating jobs for far more than we would be able to help. We have to do better than this. I do want to thank you for acknowledging the difference in small businesses versus these large corporations. There are 5.8 million small businesses in the US, comprising of 96% of all US businesses. And let's not legislate to the 4% large corporations in the US. Let's come up with a common sense approach to protect the 96% of American small businesses. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering any questions you all may have.
Mr. Sobocinski, thank you very much for being with us. The last witness in this panel will be Professor Jacob L. Vigdor. Since 2014, he has been a professor of public policy and governance at the University of Washington. Professor Vigdor, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Graham, members of the committee. I'm Jake Vigdor, Professor of Public Policy and Governance at the University of Washington in Seattle. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. In June 2014, the Seattle City Council passed a minimum wage ordinance. Starting from $9.47, the minimum wage was to rise to $15 an hour and was then indexed to inflation. Today, Seattle's minimum wage stands at $16.69 per hour for most employees. On the day the City Council passed this ordinance, it also passed a resolution calling for a 5-year independent academic study of its impact. I had the privilege of leading this 5-year study, which was conducted without the support of either business or labor groups. Today, I'm here to share with you some of the things we learned in the course of our study. There were many facets to our work. We conducted repeated surveys of business owners and managers. We sent interviewers and sometimes interpreters into the homes of parents trying to raise children on low-wage jobs. We sent researchers into stores, restaurants, and bars once a month to track consumer prices. And we used administrative, employment, and revenue data from the state of Washington to track the experiences of individual businesses and employees over time. My written testimony provides some additional detail, but let me focus on 6 key findings. Finding 1, businesses survived. To be precise, our research concluded that the higher minimum wage resulted in the closure of about 7 out of every 1,000 businesses for a survival rate of 99.3%. Finding 2, price increases were confined to the restaurant industry. We conducted intensive studies of grocery prices, tracked gas prices and rents closely, and monitored street-level retail. We found that restaurant prices went up about 10%, but that was the only detectable impact. Finding 3, businesses saw reduced turnover and higher productivity. Turnover rates in low-wage businesses are high. Our data show that if you take a set of employees working for low wages at any point in time, only about half of them would still be working for the same employer in a year and a half. This ratio increased in Seattle. At the same time, sales per hour of labor increased. Finding 4, workers who had low-wage jobs before the minimum wage increases kept them. We found no increase in unemployment among individuals already working. So far, so good. But this brings me to finding 5. Although existing workers kept their jobs, they saw their hours reduced. Employers found many ways to cut back their staffing without laying workers off. Some cut back their operating hours. Child care centers brought in fewer workers per shift. Some employers converted tasks performed by employees into tasks performed by customers themselves. This could mean anything from using the Starbucks app to order and pay for your coffee, to asking your customers to bus their own tables at a counter service restaurant. And some became more aggressive about sending workers home if business was slow, or telling employees they'd call them if they needed them instead of scheduling them in advance. Finding 6, employers lean more heavily on their experienced workers. In the course of conducting this survey, we heard managers say lots of negative things about hiring teenagers. You need to train them. They don't show up to work on time. If they ask for time off, they'll quit if you don't give it to them. Teenagers can have a lackadaisical attitude about work, in part because they often don't need the income to survive. This pattern had a beneficial impact on older workers, the adults trying to make ends meet, often while raising children. They kept more of their hours and saw a bigger boost to their paycheck. Less experienced workers, on average, saw their hours cut so severely that their paychecks ended up smaller rather than larger for more than a year after the minimum wage started to increase. And workers who had no experience at all found it harder to land that first job. The flip side of lower turnover is fewer job openings. The bottom line is a mixed message. If you want to raise the minimum wage in order to help individual adults and families struggling to make ends meet on the basis of low-wage work, the Seattle evidence supports your argument. The Seattle evidence also demonstrates the capacity of businesses to adapt, with a 99.3% survival rate in a year when the minimum wage went up by over $3.50. On the other hand, if you're worried that raising the minimum wage will erode the ability of young workers to find their first job, the Seattle evidence validates your concern. I think of it this way: business owners are so reluctant to hire inexperienced teenagers. The only thing the youth can do to give themselves a shot is to offer to work for a very low wage. But that in turn puts downward pressure on the wages of more experienced workers. Deciding to raise the minimum wage really boils down to whether you want to give an advantage to older or younger workers. That concludes my prepared remarks. I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Professor Vigdor, thank you very much. Let me begin the questioning now for our panelists. And I think one point that I did want to reiterate, because I keep hearing some confusion about this. The minimum wage bill that I am proposing does not raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour this year. It is a 5-year process. First year goes up to $9.50 an hour. Let me, if I might, ask both Terence Weiss and Cynthia Murray a question. And that question is, we had invited the CEOs of Walmart and McDonald's to be with us today. As our testimony has indicated, these are both very, very profitable corporations paying their CEOs very large compensation packages. If the CEO of Walmart or the CEO of McDonald's was with us today, Mr. Weiss and Ms. Murray, starting with Mr. Weiss, what kind of questions would you ask them? What would be your comment to them about working conditions at McDonald's or Walmart? Mr. Weiss, do you want to begin that?
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, I'm glad that you mentioned he did have the opportunity to come today. And, you know, I was recently on a call with CEO Chris Kempczinski and, you know, leads in McDonald's, only to be muted, and actually had my phone line muted. You know, they didn't take any questions. But I would definitely want to know, you know, a few years ago when McDonald's came out and said they would be just fine paying their workers $10, $12 an hour, we know that they can afford to pay their workforce $15. We know they spend billions to buy back stocks. They pay celebrities millions in advertisement fees. The money is absolutely there to pay their workers. Not only that, but to allow us to have a seat at the table. I heard the gentleman from South Carolina saying we gotta have a seat at the table when it comes to wages and things that dictate our everyday lives in the workplace. We gotta have democracy in the workplace. And I would simply ask Chris, why? Why not 15? You don't have to wait on legislation or any law to be enacted. You can pay your workers today. And silence has not been the answer, Chris. Give us a seat at the table. McDonald's workers are ready to talk and negotiate wages and benefits on the job, but you got to open that line for conversation. You got to show up. If you care truly about America and the communities and what your business brings to this country, then you should be open and willing to discuss these things, and $15 should not be negotiable. You should be able to pay your workers that. So
All right,
why?
let me
Chris?
jump in because I want to hear from Ms. Murray. But Mr. Weiss, thank you very much. Ms. Murray, did you want to make a point about what you would ask the CEO of Walmart?
Yes, I would definitely like to ask the CEO of our company, why not pay your workers $15 an hour? They made $50 billion since this pandemic began. Our CEO says that he's going to raise some of the wages to $15, $16, $17 an hour. But I'm here to ask him, why are we on the front lines and we're frontline workers putting our lives at risk every day? Why are you not embracing your workers? They keep cutting our workers, keep cutting our hours. They talked about giving us a bonus. They took it right back in the wages of cutting hours from workers and cutting days. To me, that's not telling the truth to America. It's not telling them that they put $20 billion back to share buybacks for their shareholders. I'm a shareholder, and a lot of us workers are shareholders. You have a lot of great workers that work for their company. I don't understand why they're not embracing them, lifting them up, giving them a better health care, giving us better policies that if we're sick, we can take time off without being pointed out and being fired for being sick or due to bad weather. You know, there's a lot of policies that I want Doug McMillan to answer for me. Like, why would you slow walk giving people in the South less money than the people in New York City or in DC? We did a study, and nowhere is $15 an hour enough to rent a 2-bedroom apartment. So, you know, I'm here to say again, we can't wait to 2025. We need $15 an hour now. We are living in poverty, and it's not right that we work for the most richest company in the world, and we're still stuck at $11 an hour, which is poverty wages.
Ms. Murray, thank you very, very much. Senator Graham.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield to Senator Braun. I think he has a schedule problem, and I'll let him go, and I'll get my time later.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders. Thank you, Senator Graham. I recently come from this very discussion. Built a business over 37 years before I became a senator. And as you can see, this discussion has got a dichotomy to it. You've got Wall Street and big business on one side, and you've got Main Street on the other side. My question is going to be for Mr. Sobocinski here in a moment, but the fact, and he made the point earlier, that we're rushing this through in a one-size-fits-all, like the federal government does on almost everything, it misses the mark. We're made up of 50 states. We're made up of businesses that are mostly small in this country. And this whole discussion of trying to raise a minimum wage, all of us as business owners aspire to do that. And we do it within all the tools we have to keep good employees, to make sure they work for us for a long time. And if you just look on Main Street, that's happening. But what you do here, when you have a mandate, the amount of which is huge, it's going to mostly fall on the shoulders of small business. Costco wasn't mentioned. His salary, I think, was $7.9 million. That seems like a bargain for big companies. If you're going to go somewhere, maybe talk to that sector about what you want to do to tout what you do within companies where you got so much room to spare. Senator Graham hit it on the head. When you run a small business, when you're on Main Street, you're turning the lights on when you get there, off when you leave. After a long day, you treat your employees like family. And when you put a mandate like this, it does a couple things. It's going, all the 1.4 million jobs that are forecast to be lost are going to fall on the backs of small businesses, many in the restaurant industry, which has been the hardest hit during the whole COVID crisis. And it just goes to show when you try to do something quickly, I'm afraid this is the opening salvo that we're going to see of many different policies that are not going to be thought out and will pay the consequences for it later. Indiana versus New York. Places that have high costs of living, they probably need a minimum wage above $15 an hour. But don't set it in a way that's going to start taking states that have lower costs of living, that don't need that got robust economies because it's working with the current framework in place where you got maybe especially a small business friendly climate there. A lot of moving parts to this discussion. When you look at it, it also begs the question is how does a place like the federal government that's running trillion-dollar deficits expect to do anything to move the equation when it comes to paying for more unemployment that would result, doing anything that you need to do through the federal government? It does not make sense. We need to slow it down. We need to figure out how we pay for things as we go forward and acknowledge that this is a big discussion, that the main result is going to be you're going to hurt Main Street. Wall Street's going to be unscathed by it because they could do a lot of this if they just chose to. I want this question to go to Mr. Sobocinski, because to me, he reflects who will pay the price. The restaurant industry has been hit so hard. I would like you to talk about the wages that are currently being paid within your industry. And if you did, again, a minimum wage, it doesn't reflect the tipped wage, which in many cases for part-time work pays union wages. Tell the American public about that and what would be lost.
So I think there's two ways I can answer that. The first is what we're living through right now with lower revenues, and we are managing to those lower revenues to keep afloat and to stay alive. I mentioned earlier that we are down 100 jobs from where we were a year ago today. So this pandemic is, even with somewhat of a recovery, we're down 25% of our jobs in order to manage to the lower revenue. So it'll work in the opposite. If our expenses go up, then we have to eliminate those jobs because our revenue is going to stay flat, or we're going to raise our prices and we're going to lose customers, especially right now while we're in a pandemic. When you talk about the tip wage, there's overwhelming support from tipped employees, servers, bartenders, folks that participate in a tip pooling, these entry-level jobs. There's overwhelming support, and they love the system the way it's set up. Customers love the system the way it's set up. These employees can earn as much as, in our case, we have several employees full-time that have built their own little business in their section of the restaurant and can make $30, $35 an hour. Our average tip, when you spread it all out amongst our food runners, bussers, all the entry level plus servers, bartenders, our employees are making $22 an hour, and the national industry average is 19 to 25.
Thank
for
you.
tip.
We are out of time, but I'm glad you were able to point that out. That would go when you try to do a one-size-fits-all. Thank you.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you. Mr. Holtz-Eakin, you say in your testimony that now is a terrible time to raise the minimum wage. When would be a good time to raise the minimum wage?
Senator Whitehouse, when the economy gets back to full employment. We're well below full employment now. We have millions of people out of work, many for long periods of time.
And when you say full employment, what do you mean?
When the unemployment rate gets down to something like 5, 4, the vicinity of where it was in 2019.
In that environment, you would support this raise to the minimum wage?
I wouldn't support this raise to the minimum wage. I think the issues of difference in cost of living.
You would support some raise to the minimum wage?
Yes.
You say that the consequences of this minimum wage increase will be negative employment effects, i.e. if we raise wages, we lose jobs, correct?
I'm worried about that, yes.
Is the corollary of that also true, that if we lower wages, we will gain jobs?
In some cases, yes.
And if you follow that out to its logical conclusion, if we paid no wages and lived in an economy of indentured workers, we would gain even more jobs still.
The way to raise wages is to have strong economic growth. At the end of 2019, we had record low unemployment across the labor force, particularly in some of the pockets that typically had high unemployment. We saw wages rising rapidly, especially at the low end. I think the thing to be concerned about here,
I'm just trying to figure out what your principle looks like as you describe it. Your principle as you describe it is that if we raise wages, we lose jobs. If we lower wages, we gain jobs. And I don't know why that doesn't lead to the natural conclusion that the lower the wages, the more the jobs.
So the question is...
other than that you don't like that end result.
The question is what kind of a mandate do you want to place on the private sector? Wages will rise with growth. There's no question. We've seen that. That's the best way to get raises, is to have strong economic growth, rising productivity, increasing standard of living. It's a basic recipe that's made the United States the largest, strongest economy the globe's ever seen.
Do you agree that there should be a minimum wage?
This is different. This is this is imposing a mandate on a business that does not have any additional income. So you're just transferring income. There is no rising wages. There's not additional output, additional income.
I guess I'm trying to figure out where the bottom point is for you. If we had no minimum wage at all, would that increase jobs even more than lowering the minimum wage would?
No, there's going to be natural competition for labor to begin with, and we're going to have positive wages in the economy, and they're going to be rising with productivity. So zero is not ever going to be.
So let the economic nature sort it out. Don't have a minimum wage.
You could have a minimum wage and it would have no impact if it was below the
Well, that's my point.
wage.
And that would be pointless, which is why we have a minimum wage, so that people don't have to live in economic suffering in order to let the economy in a state of nature have its way with them.
But the point, I think, is the one that Professor Vigdor made, which is the minimum wage involves trade-offs. You will take away opportunity from the less skilled, the least educated, and the youngest, the teenagers, to raise the standard of living.
I will concede that there are trade-offs.
Yes.
And I think that the simple conception that if we raise the minimum wage, that'll cost us jobs, misstates the nature of that trade-off. and misunderstands the suffering of people who are living in an unsustainable way, in an undignified way on the existing wages. And that factor, I think, belongs in this calculus, and particularly highlighted by your concession that by your own analysis, if we were to lower the minimum wage, we'd gain jobs. But even you aren't arguing that.
My concern is exactly the same as yours. Those who are most likely to have their hours cut, not get hired, are the least skilled, least experienced, least educated, and most in need of help. And this move would make them worse off, not better.
Well, I doubt that in a state of economic nature, those people are going to be well taken care of in our economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Graham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. To Mr. Wise and Ms. Murray, thank you very much for your work ethic. Mr. Wise, I know you started this journey in South Carolina, and are you with us, Mr. Wise?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Where are you from in South Carolina?
Columbia.
Columbia. All right. Go Gamecocks. What did your father, was he a military person?
Yeah, he worked at Fort Jackson. He was a cook in the military. You know, he served abroad in Germany as a cook in the military.
Yeah.
And that was his duties.
Did he retire from the military?
He did. He actually he got a little up in age and had to leave, but he's now a hospital worker. He's still in the workforce.
Well, the reason I want to say that, you have a very hardworking family. And I want to recognize that. Same to you, Ms. Murray. You know, being 65 and working at Walmart is no easy thing to do. So let's start with that concept. We want to reward hardworking people. Doug, so this conversation with Senator Whitehouse, I think, is interesting. The minimum wage was put in back in the 30s. Why?
It was part of the Fair Labor Standards Act, and it was intended to provide a floor for wages and to make sure that there was no incentive to hire children as well.
Yeah, I think that's why it was put in, exploiting underage kids.
Yep.
And back in those days, it was pretty tough stuff. The minimum wage is part of American business culture. Do you agree with that? The American business community has accepted that the minimum wage is part of their business model?
Yes.
And do you know of anybody who wants to get rid of it?
No.
Okay, so what we got to do is find out how to raise it without losing jobs and trying to create job growth, not depress job growth. Carl, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, I'll be home. I'm going to help your restaurant this weekend if I can get home. So you've had a 25% decrease in revenue due to COVID?
35% year over year, 20 versus 19.
Okay, do you see it getting any better right now?
Not at the moment. January and February started off on even a worse track. As you know, down here with our nice climate, well, we're anticipating climbing out of this around April 1st when things warm up.
Okay, so you think 2021 is going to be a tough year for you?
Absolutely, without a doubt.
Okay, let's compare 2019. Was that a good year before COVID?
2019 was our best year in the history of the company.
Okay, so the idea of raising the minimum wage, if you did it maybe differently than we're proposing, is that acceptable to you?
Yes, sir. Tried to make that point earlier, that this is not about not raising the minimum wage. This is about that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
And that 107% increase is too much.
What percentage of your business is college students, of your employees?
I don't have an exact number, but could pretty educatedly say a third of our workforce is high school and college students working part-time.
Okay. And on the top end, you have some, chefs and people who this is their career, right?
Yes, sir.
If we increase your cost at a time your revenue is down, who suffers the most in your business model?
The entry-level positions, those high schoolers, those college students, those part-time workers. A lot of the college students are trying to pay for college education themselves and working while in college. So those would be the first jobs to disappear.
Well, let's pray for better days. And Mr. Chairman and my colleagues on the other side, Waffle House gave me a plan to raise the minimum wage. I don't know if it would be appealing to you, but count me in for the idea that we can do this. I just like to get the COVID a little better spot, and we'll sit down and talk. Thank you all very much. Been a good hearing.
Thank you, Senator Graham. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses. I'm just going to maybe take a minute to state a proposition that I'd like to hear any of the witnesses who want to address it tackle. I get sometimes frustrated by minimum wage discussions because the number is kind of artificial. It's like debt ceiling limit. That's not really meaningful. If you're talking about the debt ratios are meaningful, and I sort of feel the same way sometimes about minimum wage discussions. It's going to be 15, be 11, be 16. The number isn't that meaningful. It's the policy that I think we have to grapple with. And so here's the way I've sort of developed to think about minimum wage, and it's why I support the $15 proposal, because it's the only one that's on the table that meets my philosophy or value. But I'm going to posit the philosophy that I want to hear anybody address it however they want. I think we should set a minimum wage so that a full-time worker with 2 dependents could work that wage and not be below the poverty level. You know, that would be a philosophy, and then adjust it periodically rather than the rate shock, which is tough for businesses. You only adjust it every 10 years. It does pose challenges. Right now, an adult working full-time, and I think 2/3 of people who work full-time for minimum wage are women. An adult who works full-time with 2 dependents is dramatically worse off than the poverty level. The poverty level for a family of 3 with an adult and 2 dependents, about $22,000. You work full-time for the current minimum wage, I mean, you're way below that. You're less than 2/3 of the federal poverty level. So I sort of believe, well, why not kind of put our minimum wage where our values are? We tell our kids hard work's important, work hard, that's the key to success. If we tell people hard work's important, but we have a wage that says if you do work hard full-time, you're below the poverty level, then we're lying. Hard work isn't important to us because our values would suggest that it's not. So I've seen different proposals on the table. The one that meets my objective is the $15 by 2025. I'm not opposed to some variations. I'm not opposed to the idea of some regional variations, and I'm also not opposed to the idea of, for workers, young workers entering the market, maybe having, as many states do, as the federal government does too, some lower wage for them to let them get their first job and learn what the workforce is like for a limited period of time. But I just want to get people above the poverty level. And if you have full-time workers who are below the poverty level, then we're lying to people when we tell them we value hard work. So how about that as just a stated proposition, and I'd love to hear any witness address it. We should have a minimum wage that if a full-time worker with 2 dependents worked full-time, they'd be above the poverty level. Anything wrong with that idea?
So if I
If
could.
I may?
Please, who was that? Was that Ms. Murray? Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Kane, and thank you for your question. We have a minimum wage so that workers won't be in poverty. And the Economic Policy Institute has an amazing tool on our website called the Family Budget Calculator. What we have calculated what is a modest but adequate standard of living for 10 different family types. And that's where we got the, that even $15 an hour today is necessary for a single worker without children. So I think what we can say is that $15 an hour is really what is needed for somebody to get to work every day, to be able to pay for childcare and transportation and rent and food and healthcare and so on. And so I think that the $15 an hour is absolutely affordable. It is affordable through the economy in the sense that the productivity growth in the economy, the output of workers has increased. Workers are more educated, they're more experienced than they have been, and therefore they can earn $15 an hour in a non-inflationary way. And so I would agree with you that we need to look at what it costs to live, because it isn't right that people work full-time and they can't pay their minimum but adequate costs. And this doesn't even include entertainment. It doesn't include saving for retirement. It doesn't include buying a house. It is really modest but adequate. Thank you.
So, Senator, you have stated my position perfectly. I agree with you completely. The question is, how do you get there? You bought yourself a reading assignment. I wrote up a proposal which does that by supplementing wages, not mandating a minimum wage, but by supplementing wages to make sure that you are out of poverty at all times, regardless of your family size. And that's in a structure similar to the EITC. And that's a pro-work way to get people out of poverty. The trouble with the minimum wages is it ends up being anti-work in some circumstances. Not dramatically, not in the large, but for people who I worry a lot about. So I think you've got the right philosophy, but I think this is the wrong way to get there.
My time.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Please, yeah, if the chair will allow, I'm over my time, but.
Yeah, take a few more seconds here.
It's Mr. Sobocinski. I'd just like to make a comment that, you know, there's so many different jobs in America, and not every job is a head of household job. And I like that term because I think it encourages people to work themselves up and work their way up. Mr. Weiss, if you want to come back to South Carolina, you have made an impression today and you are underutilized. And I'm sorry that your employer doesn't recognize that, but we would love to take you in South Carolina and put you in a position where you had opportunity to grow. And I think businesses that do that are the businesses that will succeed. And that's how we fix America's wage problems.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Wish we had an item before us to vote on today because I can't wait. But did want to share a couple of comments and observations from today's hearing, just to reiterate some of what's been said before, associate myself with Senator Kane's comments on the moral imperative here, the value statement. Also to recognize, as you've articulated, Mr. Chairman, you know, we're discussing and debating a minimum wage, which in far too many locations in the country is not a living wage or livable wage. We've touched on the dynamic between the CEO or other executive compensation, which is not only multiple, but multiple times, sometimes exponential times, the wages or salaries earned by entry-level workers in so many industries. That, by the way, was an issue and I think a problem even prior to COVID. So to shed the, well, we can't do this, is going to be hard because of COVID, I think is in many cases a false argument because these dynamics we were struggling with prior to the pandemic, they've been exacerbated by the pandemic, if anything. Recognition that in the restaurant industry and others as well, it's not exclusive to the restaurant industry, there's so many high school and college students that make up a chunk of the workforce. You know, it's one thing for a young person to want to get that first job, second job, for the sake of experience, building the resume, upward mobility. It's a whole different ballgame if you have to work 10, 20, 30 hours a week or more because you're trying to put your way through college, right? College affordability, Mr. Chairman, I know you know, is a whole nother conversation that we need to be having urgently. And given the ratios of employees made up of high school and college students in so many industries, it is clearly not separate and apart from the issue before us. I also want to point out that, you know, the stress and the anxiety of so many parents struggling to make ends meet, let alone that of not being able to provide for your children and your family in the way that parents would like to, starting with meeting the basic needs. Again, a dynamic that existed prior to the pandemic, only been exacerbated by the pandemic. And I don't think it's lost on any of us the cruel irony of the metrics that we sometimes refer to when it comes to the state of the economy. Both prior to the pandemic and especially since the pandemic, some people are pointing to the Dow Jones, record Dow Jones. But at the same time, we see lines and lines at food pantries across America. So let's be mindful when we look at economic indicators and whether the economy is doing well or not. Even in good times prior to the pandemic, based on the Dow Jones, you had far too many people, both unemployed and underemployed, again, exacerbated by the pandemic. We've talked about those earning less and their dependency on social services. I want to call special attention to poverty. Even when you're working, as trauma, detrimental not just to physical, but to mental health. The stress, anxiety, depression, desperation that comes from not being able to make ends meet easily, even when you're working full time. Again, something that existed prior to the pandemic, only exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. So, do have two questions I want to pose for discussion to both Mr. Weiss and Ms. Murray. I have about a minute left. Folks have talked about what a difference a $15 minimum wage would mean to them. So the quick question, or the quick answer question is, what would you do with that wage increase? Would you invest in stocks? Or would you spend it? One of the big conversations today is, what does it mean for small business? What it means for small business, I would imagine small businesses would be helped by folks having more spending money in working class communities. And the other is, if there's just any additional experiences to share of what you've had to do, what you've had to sacrifice to make ends meet, or what you've maybe been on the verge of that you never would have contemplated before in your life, because I know my family has, when I was growing up, either through additional recycling.
I'm afraid that
selling
if you
goods.
want them to answer the question, they have virtually no time at all. So let me turn it over to them. Mr. Weiss, Ms. Murray, very briefly.
Well, you know, even though me and Ms. Murray, we work for the two biggest corporations on the face of the planet, McDonald's and Walmart, you know, it's not lost on me the small mom and pop businesses, especially in my community. You know, on my way to work, when I pass Rosie's Flower Shop, Sam's Shoe Store, not Costco, not Amazon, not Walmart, but just the shops in my community that I can't, even on Valentine's Day that just passed, stop at the local flower shop and buy flowers for my wife. I can't stop and buy new shoes for my kids locally in the community because low-wage workers like me just don't have the funds to pour into our community. And if we had $15 an hour, that's a 365-day-a-year stimulus package. 15 is COVID relief. I would be able to buy my wife flowers. If in Greenville, South Carolina, I'd be able to take my family out to Carl's restaurant. We simply don't have the funds to even do that. Have fun night with the family, buy new shoes, buy flowers. You give low-wage workers money, we're not going to buy beachfront property, invest in stock. We're going to pour it into the economy, help grow it, and help grow jobs as well. Cynthia?
Okay, thank you very much. Senator Lujan.
Thank you so very much, Senator Sanders, for this important hearing, and Ranking Member Graham, and to all of the witnesses that are here before us today. Ms. Lee, more than 4 in 10 children live in a household struggling to meet basic expenses, and between 7 million and 11 million children live in households in which their parents are unable to afford even enough food. Yes or no, does the Economic Policy Institute estimate that a $15 an hour minimum wage would lift wages for 32 million Americans?
Yes.
And is it true that frontline and essential workers would make up 60% of those that would benefit?
That is exactly right, Senator.
And what percentage of workers would benefit from a minimum wage increase have children?
I think 28% of those who would benefit from the $15 minimum wage by 2025 have children.
That's what my understanding is as well. And what would increasing the minimum wage mean for the economic security of these families and children?
This would be a lifesaver. It's about $3,300 per year, and that is enough to make a difference. And I just want to reiterate what Terence said, which is that this is actually, during the pandemic, is exactly the time we need to raise the minimum wage because this recession hurt low-wage workers so badly. What we need to do to get out of the recession is put money into people's pockets who will spend it. That is what the answer is for small business and for big business and for a robust economic recovery, but particularly for those workers who are trapped in these low-wage jobs. They need to have the economic security for themselves, for their children, and that is good economics. That's not just good morality. That is good economics, because that is what's wrong with the economy, is a lack of purchasing power and too much inequality. And the minimum wage increase would help address that.
I appreciate that. Mr. Wise, I very much appreciate your responses to the number of questions that you have fielded today. And I just thank you for being here and sharing your story and making sure that you're ensuring that the rest of the country will hear your story and your call, sir. Mr. Wise, the question that I have for you is, how would raising the minimum wage change the lives of you and fellow workers, especially those raising children?
Well, it would make us feel more like humans, more like human beings. It wouldn't make me rich. I wouldn't all of a sudden be a billionaire, millionaire. It would just make life comfortable. And like we say, you shouldn't have to work in the richest nation on earth and be homeless, have to skip meals. These are things that would be off the table for millions of low-wage workers, not having to juggle bills, worry about paying my daughter's senior dues. She's graduating this year. Just the little things in life that we take for granted. And folks think you work full-time in this country, life must be great. Well, actually, it's not. And that's what we got to address. So when you give my family $15 an hour, you're not only helping me, my community, our country, but you're just making the promise that I said earlier, that America made to each and every one of us a reality.
I appreciate that, Mr. Wise. It's the dignity of a paycheck. And, I was raised in a household where my dad was a union iron worker. He was also a state representative later on. And, he got involved in public service. My mom retired after 33 years from the local public school district. And, when I got elected to the United States Senate, sir, I was surprised that not all of my colleagues had gone to Head Start. I thought all of us went to Head Start. I forget that you have to qualify for Head Start. And when you qualify for Head Start, it means that you probably don't make so much money as well. And these programs make a difference in people's lives. I understand there's two of us now in the United States Senate that attended Head Start, myself and United States Senator Raphael Warnock as well. So we might have to start that Head Start caucus. But the story that you just shared with me, sir, the dignity of being seen and treated like a person and being able to provide for our families, that's what this is about. And I just appreciate, again, you being here today, Mr. Wise, and congratulations to your daughter on that graduation. And God willing, one of these days, I look forward to maybe meeting you in person, shaking your hand and learning more from you. Chairman, I thank you for the time today and for this important hearing, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Senator. A vote has been called at 12:10, so the vote has begun already. But what I would like to do is now invite up our last panelist, who is Cindy Brown Barnes, who is the Director of Education, Workforce, and Income Security at GAO. Ms. Barnes joined GAO in January 1990. She oversees work on programs and policies supporting Americans of all ages. Ms. Barnes, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Graham, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss our October 2020 report that found that millions of wage-earning American adults participate in federal health care and food assistance programs. As you know, Medicaid and the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, two of the largest federal social safety net programs, provide health care and food assistance to low-income individuals and families near and below the federal poverty line, including many working adults whose low incomes make them eligible for these means-tested programs. We previously reported that the characteristics of the low-wage workforce had changed little in recent decades. Specifically, low-wage working adults consistently comprise about 40% of the U.S. workforce. Their limited work hours likely compound their income disadvantage, and educational gains do not always result in higher wages. Moreover, we found that the percentage of working families in poverty has remained relatively constant, and that poverty is most prevalent among families with a worker earning the federal minimum wage or below. My testimony today will cover: 1, what is known about the labor characteristics of wage-earning adult Medicaid enrollees and SNAP recipients, and 2, where these individuals work. First, I want to summarize what we found at the national level. From our analysis of 2018 census data, We found that millions of wage-earning adults who were enrolled in Medicaid or living in households that received SNAP food assistance shared common labor characteristics, including working predominantly for private sector employers, mostly working full-time work schedules, and being highly concentrated in 5 industries and occupations. Specifically, an estimated 12 million adults enrolled in Medicaid and 9 million adults living in households receiving SNAP benefits earned wages in 2018. More than 2/3 of these workers in each program work 35 hours or more per week, and the majority of them work full-time hours 50 weeks or more in 2018. About 90% of these wage earners worked in the private sector in 2018. About 7 in 10 of these wage-earning adult Medicaid enrollees and SNAP recipients worked in 5 industries and occupations. These workers were more concentrated in the leisure and hospitality industry, which includes lodging and food service, than otherwise similar workers. Similarly, these workers worked in one of the top 5 occupations, which include sales, food preparation, and building and grounds cleaning and maintenance. Next, I would like to highlight what we found when examining employers in selected states from February 2020, just prior to the onset of COVID-19. These data from 6 state Medicaid agencies and 9 state SNAP agencies provided insight into where adult Medicaid enrollees and SNAP recipients work. Specifically, most of these working adults work for private sector employers. Restaurants and other eating places, a category that includes sit-down restaurants, fast food franchises, and pizza shops, employ the largest percentage of these individuals in these states. Department stores, grocery stores, employment service agencies, and general merchandise stores, such as big box and discount stores, also feature prominently across the states we examined. Public sector employers, including government entities, such as federal, state, tribal, and local, and public university systems, also employed Medicaid enrollees and SNAP recipients in most of the states that provided data. In the nonprofit sector, hospitals, disability service organizations, and charitable organizations were among the leading employees of these workers. Finally, many adult Medicaid enrollees and SNAP recipients were self-employed. For example, babysitting, cleaning services, hairstylists, landscaping, and construction were frequently cited sources of self-employment income in these states. In conclusion, our report shows that irrespective of the overall economy's health, there remain millions of low-income workers who contribute to the workforce by working full-time jobs while raising their families. Unfortunately, they still cannot make ends meet. Federal social safety net programs like Medicaid and SNAP offer such families a lifeline and play a vital role in stemming poverty. Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Graham, and members of the committee, this concludes my prepared remarks. I'll be pleased to respond to any questions you may have at this time.
Well, Ms. Brown-Bonds, thank you very much for your very important work. So let me ask you a brief question. Is it true that among the 15 agencies you reviewed in the states that you looked at, Walmart was in the top 4 employers of program beneficiaries in each and every one?
Yes, that is true.
Is it correct that McDonald's was a top 5 employer of employees receiving federal benefits in 13 of the 15 agencies?
Yes, that's also true.
You were unable to look at 50 states. You looked at how many states?
We looked at 11 states, but it included 15 state agencies. So there were a couple of states that also provided us data for Medicaid enrollees as well as the SNAP recipients.
Are you able to come up with any estimate as to how much in tax-supported programs low-wage workers nationally receive?
We were not able to come up with an estimate for a national level. I mean, this is the data that we set out to collect, but it's just not collected.
You just didn't have the information to make that estimate.
That's right.
Okay. Well, I think the bottom line of your report is that we have a whole lot of people who are working full-time, who are working hard, but need to get public assistance in order to take care of themselves and their families. Is that kind of the bottom line?
Yes, that's one of the bottom lines.
Okay. Senator Graham?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been a very good hearing. I've enjoyed it. Thank you. Do you agree with the CBO estimate that raising the minimum wage as being proposed would result in 1.4 million jobs being lost?
We haven't looked at the minimum wage proposal or studied the CBO report.
Okay, so you haven't looked at that. What percentage of businesses in America employ less than 50 people?
What percent?
Yeah, American employers hire less than 50 people.
I don't have that because ours focused on those that employ more.
Yes, ma'am. Do you know what percentage of the American business community is classified as small business?
I don't, we didn't look at that specifically in this study.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's all. Thank you.
Warren, do we have anybody else? All right, I don't believe that there are any other senators who wanted to ask questions. Anybody out there? All right, if not, this hearing is adjourned, and we thank all of the guests who joined us today. Thank you very much.